Hello and welcome. This is the first of a two-part video. I initially intended to do this all at one, but then it got pretty long. So we're going to do this in two parts. On to the subject at hand. I personally come from a Christian background. It is how I was raised, and in my experience, it is a system of control and fear that I had to spend decades disentangling myself from. It's been a long, hard process, but I'm finally finding myself in my 40s in a place where I'm really at peace with the things that once caused me great fear. So I wanted to talk about belief and the depth to the concept that in my experience is missing from the teachings of Christianity. I found that belief was a word just kind of tossed about, as if everyone should inherently know how to believe. As if you could just wake up one day, decide that you believe something, and boom, you're a bona fide believer. It doesn't work that way. Have you ever noticed how many Christians seem so desperate to convince everyone they believe? That they believe so much. Through their actions, the Jesus logos on their shirts, the constant talk about how much they believe and how amazing it is to believe? Yeah, I noticed it too. Especially in the Christians that raised me and that I went to church with. Maybe it's the empath in me, but I could always see through the facade. It took a long time to understand just what I was seeing. But I would see a church full of people in apparent worship, whispering, "Yes, Jesus," and things of that nature as the pastor read from the Bible or preached whatever sermon they were on that day. And it felt off to me. Something felt wrong or incomplete or unreal about the situation. Something felt off about all of those people. This may be specific to the born-again type of Christians, as I know these experiences aren't necessarily across the board, and many people are born into their faith and just kind of stay there. After decades of learning and contemplation, I've come to understand that what happens for many Christians is that when they come to Christianity, they're often in a place of deep pain, and a person usually converts them by sharing how being a Christian is so amazing and that they'll be reborn and God will take all of their problems and they'll be saved from themselves if only they open their heart to Jesus and declare aloud that they believe and accept Jesus as their Savior. And they may go through the whole baptism thing because it's promised once they do that their lives will never be the same. And who wouldn't want that? For their lives to suddenly change for the better. I think we all want that. And I feel oftentimes there's love bombing that happens in these situations. Someone comes along and tells a person who is experiencing and trying to cope with some trauma and says, "Oh, you're amazing and I love you, and you know who will love you forever and never leave your side and who will make sure you receive nothing but goodness? Jesus, that's who. He will even take away your pain, and if you pray, he will fix your shit." And that sounds so much better than having to do all of it yourself. In fact, that's one of the greatest tricks of Christianity, is saying you can sit back and let Jesus take the wheel. And we will get into that in another video. It works almost like getting into a relationship with a narcissist. Circling back to that love bombing thing I said. They make it seem like they really get you, and they future fake by saying they're going to be and do all of these things that are going to benefit you. And they invite you into all these nice things you didn't have before, and you're suddenly feeling seen and loved and like you never want this feeling to end. So you convert to Christianity, because you think this feeling won't ever go away if only you believe. And then the day comes. The feeling is gone, and you don't understand why. Your new Christian friends are busy converting someone else and showering them with all this love and attention, and of course they still love you, but they're just busy and don't have time. And then you're listening to the preacher in church, and you start to feel as if maybe it's your fault. Maybe you aren't believing hard enough, praying hard enough, being Christian enough. Maybe you even don't feel like you're connecting to Jesus at all. Maybe the mystical experiences you were told would happen never come to pass. Maybe all your troubles are still there, sitting in front of you, undealt with. And maybe, in your head, it's all your fault. And the preacher is standing up there kind of making it sound like it is all your fault. They're talking about sin and all these ways in which we turn away from God. And if only we would stop sinning, then God could find a way to love us again. Which is so strange, because wasn't that the whole point of Jesus dying on the cross? And yet they keep railing on about sin. So odd. Anyway, and that's where the guilt starts. Once again, you feel like everything is your own fault, that you're just not doing this thing good enough. Look at all the Christians, how happy and connected they seem to be. You maybe feel a little left out in the cold, and then maybe you feel like you're just a bad believer. So you do what anyone would do. You fake happiness, you fake that you feel whole and complete in the church, you fake it so hard, and maybe you can convince yourself. Because deep down, when you feel a twinge of not being a good enough Christian, the fear of going to hell rears its ugly head. And you're re-traumatized over and over by that concept, which was mostly invented by Dante and isn't actually in the Bible as Christians explain it, but that's a subject for another video as well. Continuing on. This leads to a Christian who is in deep internal conflict. They externally project the look of someone who is and so happy by being Christian because how could you not be? Because they fear if they ever express the truth, they'd face not only possible judgment from their fellow Christians, but also like they failed Jesus himself. And that would mean they don't actually believe in Jesus at all, and again, are going to hell. You see how it's a vicious cycle you get stuck in. And you'll get a bunch of Christians who will cry out how wonderful it is to be a Christian and do everything the church says, like giving money and converting everyone they can and fighting political battles that actually have nothing to do with Jesus at all, even though the church says it does. And they do all this because of a fear that was instilled in them by humans and human-made concepts. And because this fear runs so deep, if you poke at it by saying anything that goes against Christianity, or basically everything I said above, they lash out in fear. So yeah, I fully expect backlash for this, and I don't care. If the message doesn't resonate, move on. You'll get around to understanding this, maybe in your next life. Carry on, it's all good. So when I was in church and feeling a true discomfort and oddness about how the people were behaving, it was so surreal, honestly. And this is every time, across various ages, it wasn't only one experience. It was because I saw through the facade, and I could tell their outward actions did not match what they truly felt. I could sense I was in a deeply disturbed space with people who were like zombies, but I had no words for it at the time. As a child in church, I was truly afraid of how these people seemed to go through the motions of something that was so clearly incongruent with how they were feeling inside. It genuinely scared me to see people who were so obviously mind-controlled. And that's a big part of what drove me away from the church. The burning fear of becoming like those people, of being a shell of my former self. I mean, that's not the liberation promised by Christianity at all. And this is something that hasn't come up for me in a long time. I had to kind of go back and really think about my experiences, and I suddenly remembered the first fears I actually had when I was exposed to Christianity, that later I ended up thinking was just me being afraid of going to hell. No, the real fear I first experienced was a fear of becoming a shadow of myself that just goes through the motions of Christianity and denies my true self. That was terrifying. Truly. And as a child, I understood it in ways I couldn't explain, that I genuinely didn't even figure out till more recently. I didn't have the words. I just knew it in my gut that something was very, very wrong there. And there were a lot of instances like that for me as a kid, not just around church. I have to admit, I'm a little shook right now because that's a deep memory that's been lost to me for a long time. Decades. I think I was between 7 and 10 when that was going on. I know there were other times as a kid my intuition made me see and feel things weren't right in a situation, and I was so uncomfortable, but I couldn't put it into words that adults would understand, so I acted out. Crying, screaming, throwing a tantrum, just not wanting to go places, be around certain people, or do certain things. But I couldn't explain or sometimes even understand why. And I know I've been repeating myself a little bit throughout this, but this has led to a deep personal revelation I wasn't expecting, and now I'm kind of, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here because I think I need to process this. So there will be a part 2 where I get into what belief really means and how to raise your vibration. Actual, real, practical advice, which feels so rare. Tune in next time. Be well, and I love you.